All right, we're at 5:32, so I think I will get started. Ed, anything we have to say before I get going?
Not really.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, maybe except to remind that, our next assignment is basically almost the same assignment.
Same thing, but your other proposal, and I'll mention that in this talk. So we'll talk about homework 14 when I get there in this talk. Okay, so like always, folks, this is about the candidacy exam, and I know I've had quite a few students ask me if we were going to talk about the candidacy exam this class. So here's the one. This is the only talk we're going to give, so it's going to be a little bit longer because I'm going to cover everything in this one talk. But I'm going to try to be done in about 30 minutes so that you guys can get to your reviews. Anyway, but with that said, interrupt me anytime, and we can go a little bit longer if you guys have lots of questions. Okay, so this is the candidacy exam at Wayne State Chemistry. It's not necessarily the same candidacy exam in every department, so please realize that this talk is very specific to our department in our university. So if you're in a different department or a different university, the requirements might be very, very different. Okay, so first of all, let's go through what are the different, the chronology, kind of the chronological order of things that you're going to do for the candidacy exam. And I thought we would start with the earliest thing just so that you can be familiar with all of your responsibilities. The first thing you're going to do for the candidacy exam, to get it set up is several months before the exam. Typically we do this in January of the winter term. You'll work with your research advisor and Melissa Rochon to identify 2 faculty for your PhD committee. So certainly you will have your research advisor on your committee, and then you need 2 more faculty. One of those other faculty will be from your division, and one will be outside of your division. If you're in a research field that's sort of straddling already 2 divisions, then you would pick from those 2. But you'll work with Melissa just to make sure that your faculty members aren't overburdened. And then once you have your committee assembled formally, then you can email your committee members to set the date of that 2-hour meeting, okay? Then 1 week before the exam, you are gonna email the committee members the 3 documents that I have listed here. One is the prospectus, one is the independent research proposal. This is the same independent research proposal that we've been working on all class. So this is the one. And then of course your CV. I would highly encourage you to send your CV. I think it's really important. So we're assuming here that this perspective and this independent research proposal are being prepared during this time. I don't have that formally on this list, but we'll talk about that later in this talk. You should be working on your prospectus and your independent proposal basically now until you defend. Okay. The day before the exam, I just want you to realize that faculty need reminders, so please remind us about our dates and time and place. And then finally, at the exam, and I'm really going to focus today on what you're going to do at the exam. This is a 2-hour exam. The first hour will be devoted to a presentation on your prospectus and questions on your prospectus. Remember, the prospectus is a report you're writing about the research you're doing in your research advisor's lab. And then finally, the independent, you'll have an hour then to talk about your independent research proposal and take questions. And for each half of this exam, for each hour, the first 15 minutes of each hour will be for the presentation that I will talk about in this lecture. But because we want it to be only 15 minutes, we really want you to stick to this time because we need that time, that extra 45 minutes for you to answer questions. And it's during this question and answer period that we as faculty are able to kind of assess your knowledge level and your kind of how well you can think on your feet. And don't be surprised if we don't wait until you're done with your presentation to start asking questions. Questions throughout the hour are reasonable. Finally, so that you're prepared for this, at the end of the meeting, we'll ask you to step out of the room. If it's a virtual meeting, we'll literally have you virtually step out of the room, or you would physically step out of the room so that the committee can discuss the performance and kind of the outcome of the meeting. So you will be asked at some point to leave the room so that the performance can be discussed. Okay, so that's basically how the candidacy exam works and kind of your responsibilities outside of just writing the documents and getting ready in that way. But we'll talk about the documents, don't worry. So what I want to do in this presentation is to talk about 3 aspects of this exam. We've already been working on the independent research proposal all class. So I will mention the independent research proposal a little later, but I'm going to start by talking about this prospectus document. I'm going to give you a feel for what it is and how to write it and some of the rules about that one. Then I'll move on to talk about the presentation that you'll give in the exam, give tips on how to put a presentation together and what should be in it. And then finally, I'll give you just some tips at the very end about how to prepare for those questions at the end. And remember, that question and answer period is really pretty critical. So I want to make sure that you're thinking about it. Okay, so with that introduction, let's move on to talk about our first aspect here, which is prospectus document. And again, folks, please raise your hand or ask a question in the chat and I'll try to get to it. I'm monitoring them. Okay, so let's talk about the prospectus document. Remember, the prospectus means that this is written about the research you are doing in your research advisor's laboratory. Okay, so the prospectus is written such that you can use it as the document you would give to the graduate school formally as part of your degree requirements. According to the graduate student handbook, and I'm sorry I forgot to put the link here. I can add that later. But basically, this is on the chemistry department website. In fact, maybe I'll show you how to get there because it's really important you know how to access this document when you need it to make sure you know. So what you will do is you'll go to the chem.wayne.edu website. So I guess I'll find it here. So if you go to the chem.wayne.edu website and you go under graduate students and student handbooks, it will have your graduate student handbook 2019 here. And this is all the rules that you have to live by, okay? Okay, so, but taken from that handbook is this little explanation of the prospectus. The research document or prospectus should be 6 to 10 pages long, must not exceed 10 pages, not counting references. The document should include preliminary results in addition to clearly stated hypotheses and goals, in addition to well-developed future directions. Detailed methods or experimental sections should not be included. Brief summaries are acceptable if appropriate. It is expected that the text and most of the figures will be prepared by the student as original work. Plagiarism will result in an automatic failure of the exam. And we've already talked about these things in our class. Plagiarism, of course, is serious. Making your own figures is something we've already talked about. Let's talk a little bit more about sort of the components of this document. Honestly, there is a great deal of variety that I've seen in this prospectus document. So you should really work with your research advisor to find out what their expectations are. But I can kind of envision 2 different scenarios here. The type of prospectus I like my students to write, and one that I would propose that you talk about your research advisor, is to write the prospectus like a proposal, much like what we have done in our class. You guys are already prepared to write a proposal as your prospectus. I think this would be the kind of easiest way to go. And in this case, you would use the same outline that we use for our independent proposal, but the big difference is that you will be in the lab generating preliminary data to prove that you can feasibly do the experiments in your prospectus, in your approach, your aim section. So you can write this very much like what we did in our class, just taking advantage of preliminary data, which you can't do in your independent proposal. Now, if your research advisor would prefer not a proposal type document, they might ask you to write something more like a publication. So a publication typically has an introduction, a results, and a discussion section. And you can do that same thing. In this case, it would be more results oriented. It would be what you've already accomplished. But the difference between this prospectus document and a document that you would read in a publication is that you would expect here to have an extra section that would not be in a normal paper, an extensive future direction section. And in fact, that future direction section should be written much like the approach section of our independent research proposals in this class. So if your faculty advisor would prefer to make it look like a publication, you could write the introduction, results, and discussion, and then you're going to add this future direction section, which essentially is like your approach section. Okay? But I strongly encourage you to talk about this with your advisor, because your advisor will tell you what their expectations are. You know, you really want to be mentored by your research advisor. So please keep them in the loop. Okay. So as you may have kind of realized from this advice, the research advisor is a very important person when it comes to the prospectus. And so one of the key differences I want to make sure is very clear to you is the fact that the prospectus and the independent research proposal have a very different relationship with your research advisor, okay? The prospectus, you are expected, not just encouraged, expected to get feedback and advice from your faculty advisor. They should be helping you every step of the way when it comes to this document and preparing for this exam. You're also, of course, welcome to get feedback from your peers, graduate students and postdocs, but you are absolutely expected to get advice from your research advisor for this document. In contrast, in sharp contrast, it's expected that the independent proposal is not, you are not getting the advice of your faculty advisor. You may not get feedback. We want you to be independent. This is an independent proposal, meaning you are not allowed to get the advice of your faculty advisor. So please do not give the independent proposal to your research advisor and don't expect any help. But as you have learned from our class, you may get as much advice as possible from your peers. Please engage as many people as you can, many of your peers as you can in the process of writing. Okay, so make sure that's clear. The prospectus, you will write in collaboration, well, not in collaboration, but with the advice of your research advisor. It is your document, you will write it, but you are welcome to get as much advice and feedback from the proposal, from your advisor as you want. The independent proposal, though, is off limits to your faculty advisor. Okay, so when do you start writing your prospectus? I think that's up to you and your advisor. Please ask your advisor. You can start writing it now. Maybe you've already started writing it. Talk to your advisor about it. Because your advisor can be involved in the writing of the prospectus, you really want to keep them in the loop. How do you deal with your independent proposal? Well, you've already gotten a first draft, and you are going to be writing and rewriting and rewriting that until you give your exam. So please keep that in mind. You can continue writing that until you defend. Okay? So my advice is to really make sure you take advantage of this extra time you've gotten, more than any other class in the history of our department. You guys are getting a lot more time to really start thinking about these documents. Okay, so let's talk about the prospectus document. If you choose to follow the proposal format that we've used in our class, and again, that's, I would recommend it. I'm gonna have my students do that. Follow this general format for our class. Set writing deadlines to complete each section of the proposal, the prospectus proposal, and then don't miss a deadline. Just like we had points associated with each writing assignment, even when you guys had a lot to write, you guys still made your deadlines, even if you weren't thrilled about the document. So please make your deadlines. It's really important. And then you would, of course, break down what your deadlines would look like. It can be each of these sections, the same sections that we wrote in our document, okay? So if you want to kind of make it happen quickly and really be really diligent about setting goals and achieving them. So for example, if you're thinking about using this full proposal, you would use the same outline that we used for our proposal, the independent proposal. The main difference, of course, is that in the case of your prospectus, because you will be in the lab getting data, you will be able to add data to this preliminary results section. So you will keep it, and you will use this preliminary results section to show your committee members feasibility. So the preliminary results section are where you will add the data you generate in the lab as evidence that the proposed studies are feasible in your hands and are likely to work. So as you're designing experiments in the lab with your research advisor, keep in mind that these are the experiments that are really going to show that you can achieve the experiments in your full thesis that are proposed in this document, okay? All right, so once you then, so how long will it take you to write this document? Well, just to give you some perspective, we wrote you wrote a first draft of your research proposal in a roughly 4 weeks. If you look at the amount of time from the writing the abstract to finishing up the future directions, it was roughly 4 weeks. I would say that's pretty quick. I don't know how you felt about it, but I thought it was pretty quick. So if you choose, you can get this thing written in 4 weeks if, again, you set deadlines. But, you know, now knowing the experience you've had in our class, you can now start creating a time frame that works for you. If you want more time, then start earlier. Okay. The next thing, after you've created that first draft, you would be kind of where we are in our independent proposals written in this class. Next is the process of rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. You know, that's where we are in our class. You're going to do that same process here with the prospectus. Just like with your independent proposal, your prospectus, you will refine your ideas and the grasp of your project by reading papers, rereading key papers, just making sure that you're really thoughtful about what's going into the document. And then just like you're doing for the independent proposal, you're going to be rewriting sentences, paragraphs, and sections to achieve those clear, concise, and impactful sections that you want, okay? So rewriting, 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 so same process. And then finally, you are going to get advice, in this case from your research advisor. Once you have a document that you're pretty proud of, you're going to give it to your research advisor so they can tear it up and you can rewrite it again, okay? Get more feedback. Be sure that you get feedback from not just your research advisor, but from your peers. They've been through this process before. They might point out things that would be really, that maybe your research advisor didn't even think about. So, but give yourself enough time to get that feedback. I'd say you need at least a month. Maybe if you can get the documents at least 2 months before your exam, that would be ideal. And remember, you guys have so much time. Don't procrastinate and wait to the end. Make sure that maybe you start writing this, you know, maybe no later than the fall, just to give you lots of time. And then, you know, please use any advice that you get from your research advisor. I know with my students, as I'm giving them feedback on their prospectus, they're saying, oh, I need to think about that in my independent proposal, because now that you made me think about the deeper thinking I need here, it's making me realize I need to have deeper thinking in my independent proposal. So the point is, whatever advice and you know, the advice your research advisor gives about the prospectus, please learn from it so that you can also improve your independent proposal. Okay, so that's what I had to say about the prospectus. Let me just finish up the documents by returning to your independent proposal, which is the subject of our class. The good news is that at this point, you already have the first draft of your independent research proposal, right? You've been through that process. You're pretty experienced, and now you can go through that process with your prospectus. We are now in the stage where you are rewriting and rewriting and rewriting your prospectus. And as part of that process, we have asked for you to get peer reviews. That's what we're doing in the breakout sessions for the next 2 days. And so I just want to point out that homework 14, here's your instructions. It's actually very similar to homework 13. But in this case, instead of reviewing the first proposal, you're going to be reviewing the second proposal. And please look at the homework 14 document that's in Canvas in our website for table 1 to see which proposal you're assigned. You're going to draft the critique of that proposal in the same way that you did for today's assignment. You'll upload the document for Ed and I, but you'll also email the review to your students. And the point here is that you will then discuss your review with your colleague to help them improve their document. Okay. So you guys are already in the process of rewriting. And then once you feel like you've gotten a lot of feedback and you are ready for more feedback, please get advice from your lab mates. Remember, in this case, you cannot send it to your faculty advisor. They can have no role in this document. But you are absolutely encouraged to give this document to your lab mates so that they can help you further. I hope our peer mentor groups are helping you a lot, but you can get more and more advice to make it better. And then, of course, take anything you learn from the prospectus, as I said, try to incorporate this into your independent proposal. Okay, so those are the documents. I haven't got any questions about those, so I guess that must be pretty clear. So you will have 2 documents and your CV. We've already talked about the CV, so I'm going to move on from talking about the documents that you're going to be generating in the next 9 months to the presentations. So we're going to move into what you will do at the exams and how you'll prepare for the presentation that you'll do at the exam. All right, so remember that the presentation is roughly 15 minutes. You want to talk to your advisor first about the format of that presentation. I think it's assumed that most people will use PowerPoint presentations, but some advisors prefer that you use some chalk talking, or they have other programs they want you to use. Please talk to your advisor about the format they want you to use, because presenting, creating slides and presenting is really part of the exam. And you want to make sure that your advisor understands kind of what you're doing. The advisor, of course, can't give you advice on the presentation related to the proposal, the independent proposal, but they can give you a lot of advice on the prospectus. So please be sure you're working with them. So I think because most of you will be doing PowerPoint presentations, I thought I would give you a little bit of advice on what a PowerPoint presentation should look like here. A 15-minute presentation, you want to keep the number of slides pretty short. 10 to 15, I think, would be 15 max. And it kind of depends on the content of each slide, but in general, you want to keep to stay to 15 minutes, you probably don't want to have any more than 10 true content slides. Always include a title slide, because that's a great place to start. And I always encourage my students to use this title slide as kind of a transition to your first slide. Today I'm going to talk about COVID-19 as part of my proposal. Let's talk about COVID-19 first. Okay, so use your title slide as a transitional slide. Then in addition to your title slide, you want to have some introductory slides, probably more than one, but definitely not more than 5. I'd say 5 is way too many. I think maybe 2 or 3 would be good. I would encourage you to have something kind of like an outline slide. I'll show you what that is in a minute, because I made like a mock presentation for you. But just to show the committee sort of your aims and kind of what you're going to talk about in your approach slides. Then you'll have approach slides. You're probably going to have a few slides per aim. So this approach section might be your most slides, and then a conclusion. To keep to only 10 slides, think about it. You'll have 1 title slide, maybe 2, maybe 3 introductory slide, an outline slide, maybe 3 or 4 approach slides, and that's about it. So you really don't have a lot of room. You want to make sure your slides are really effective. The last piece of advice I'll give at this point, I have a few more tips later, but I want you to realize that words on a slide when you're giving a presentation are very distracting. What happens is that the person is going to read the words instead of listening to you. You may have found yourself doing that on my word slides. I mean, I think for a lecture, you have to have words, because you guys will refer to this lecture when you're doing the work for your candidacy exam. So in a lecture, I tend to put more words, but in a presentation, you really want to minimize your words. Use pictures whenever possible. And so I thought, instead of just saying that, so I thought I would show you what I mean. So what I did in the next few slides is I kind of came up with a mock presentation based on the COVID-19 project that we've been developing in our class. And the name of this is my title slide. This would be the slide that we will see when the faculty members walk in the room, so they're ready. So in this case, this is my independent proposal. This would be the second thing that they see. So they wouldn't see this necessarily when they walk in the room, but this would be my title slide. Magnetic nanoparticle detection of COVID-19. This is my title slide. And then what I would do is, to transition to my first introductory slide, I would say we're going to develop a new detection method for COVID-19 given its pandemic status in the health of our world. So let me give you a little bit of background on COVID-19. So I would transition. Now, this is what I would call the worst case of a word slide, a slide with tons of words. Because right now, you're probably not listening to me at all. You're reading the slide. So let's read the slide together, so at least you'll listen to me. The virus that causes COVID-19 is SARS-CoV-2. As of today, the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, indicated that the number of COVID-19 cases is, let's just say, over 1 million, with over 120,000 deaths in the US. As of today, the World Health Organization, the WHO, documents over 9 million cases with over 470 deaths worldwide. Beyond the numbers, quarantines, social distancing, and personal protective equipment have changed our daily lives. Isn't that the truth? One problem that has contributed to the disruption is the lack of fast, cheap, reliable, and high-capacity virus testing. I don't know about you, but I got bored reading that. And I think you probably got bored listening to me. Word slides like this, bullet points, are terrible in a talk. They are not engaging. They are not captivating. They are boring. Don't do it. Do not add one of these slides to your document, okay? Instead, I'm going to show you a better way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these bullet points that I have here, and I'm going to make them into something much more entertaining, engaging, more interesting, okay? So instead of starting here from my title slide, I'd say, I'm going to introduce you to COVID-19 as pandemic. And you see, I'm going to do now a visual. COVID-19 is a viral pandemic that has affected the world. As of today, in the course of the last 5 or 6 months since it started its havoc, there have been over 9 million cases and over 470 deaths worldwide. As you can see from this graphic, the countries hardest hit with the largest number of confirmed cases includes the United States, the country that we are in. And so looking a little deeper at the US also is suffering from this pandemic with, as of today, over 200 million cases and over 120 deaths. And unfortunately for us in the US, this has not changed yet. There are still thousands of new cases a day. And in fact, the CDC and their website just said that there were over 34,000 new cases today in the US. This is a serious problem in the United States. Do you see how I made my point much clearer by using a graphic? Let's finish up that. I had to do this in 2 slides. So one of the key challenges facing the US as well as other countries is the issue of, is the way that it has affected our daily lives. Not only has this virus wreaked havoc in terms of health of a lot of Americans and people worldwide, but it's really meant that we've had to social distance ourselves from people that we love. We can only talk across the way here. We aren't going to restaurants. We aren't able to do the things we love to do together. In addition, it means that we're wearing lots of masks and having personal protective equipment like we've never done before. One of the key reasons that this type of distancing is required is because the tests we have available right now are not extensive enough. We're not quick enough and fast enough for us to get enough testing so that we can prevent ourselves from having to do quarantining and social distancing all the time. With the availability of fast, cheap, reliable, and high-capacity testing, we would be able to avoid some of this disruption to our daily lives, and we certainly would probably reduce the economic impact on our world. Do you see how I did that a little more effectively with some pretty figures? I'm hoping I'm engaging you a little bit more. And by the way, all these figures I took were right from the CDC website, so you can find lots of great stuff. How are we going to develop that detection method? So I'm just going to continue and show you how I would do the rest. I have one more slide. In our proposal, we are going to use magnetic nanoparticles, these functionalized nanoparticles, where you can see this little V-shaped molecule is an antibody that we are going to conjugate to a magnetic nanoparticle. When in the presence then of the virus, by the way, do you recognize this figure? This is the very figure that Ed made in one of our classes. I just kind of animated it. In the presence of coronavirus, these functionalized nanoparticles will bind, and then we can sensitively detect them by using nuclear resonance imaging by looking at the T2 relaxation time of the COVID-19 virus in the presence of these magnetic nanoparticles. To prove that this technology will be fast, cheap, and reliable and high throughput, we have proposed 2 specific aims. And what I will do in the rest of my talk is talk about those 2 specific aims. Anyway, that's where I'll stop, but you can see that I'm trying to give you an idea of how to make this proposal or this presentation really engaging. Once you have your slides, like I just have, what you're going to do first is practice by talking aloud to yourself and time yourself. Make sure that you are able to keep to that 15 minutes time, and make sure that you're feeling good about your words. You're not stumbling. You really know what you're saying. And then, of course, practice in front of a group. Practice, practice, practice. Ask your group to watch the presentation and give you lots of feedback, and not just vague feedback. Go through each slide and ask them to give you feedback on each slide. Okay, so those are my bits of advice about the presentation. I'd like to switch gears now and end by talking about the question and answer period. And to me, preparing for the question and answer period might be kind of the most confusing. I think it's pretty clear how to write a document and get, revise it. Maybe it's also clear how to make a presentation and get advice on how to improve it. How do you prepare for questions? Because you can't predict what those questions are, right? Here's my advice, and it's pretty simple advice. Basically, just realize, actually, first of all, realize that the questions that the faculty are going to ask you are going to be derived from your project. It will be somehow tangentially related. So really think about your project and dig deep into what the fundamental chemistry is about your project. And then I would also, I forgot to put it on this slide, but I would also think about your committee members. Each of them are going to come in with their own bias. Think about their training, their research. They, Ed would ask questions more about the MRI image, the magnetic resonance part of this COVID-19 proposal, but I would probably ask more questions about the organic chemistry, how to make the bead, and then the biochemistry, how to analyze the bead. So think about the bias of your committee members, because that might give you some clue what they could ask, right? More generally then, you want to prepare yourself by really thinking about 3 different aspects of your proposal. Be sure that you've read thoroughly and can answer questions about any paper that's cited in your proposal. If it's cited in your prospectus or your independent proposal, that means you've read it thoroughly, and you can use that information to answer questions. Okay, so please be sure you are well read and know those citations. The second piece of advice is be sure that for every experiment that you're proposing, you understand why you're doing that experiment, you understand how you're doing that experiment, the experimental setup, and you understand how you will interpret that data. And that's particularly true for your prospectus. They're going to have a very high level of expectation that you know what you're going to be doing in your PhD work. But even with the independent proposal, they're going to want to hear that you've really thought about these experiments. So be sure that you've thought about the experiment. Every little detail has been considered. What buffers, even though you don't have the buffers and the time and the concentration in the documents, you should have thought about it. Okay. Finally, I would think about what aspects of your coursework would be relevant to your independent proposal. Let's say you're doing on our COVID-19 project, and you had a little bit of information in your biochemistry class about viruses. Be sure you read up on them, right? Maybe you talked about antibodies in one of your class. Be sure you've read up on antibodies. So make sure any basic knowledge that is in your documents is really reflected in your studying, okay? And then remember that when you do your practice talks, you want to do your practice talks in front of an audience. Ask them to ask you questions, because they might ask you questions you weren't prepared for, and that will let you prepare better. Okay, I wanted to just end by talking about maybe something that's a little bit more delicate, and that is about the pass-fail aspect of your exam, because you will at the end get a pass or a fail. And so I want to talk about that, but I thought to make it a little bit lighter, we would talk about it in terms of myths. You know I love my myths. And this, I think, might be my last myths of the term. So we'll say goodbye in this way. So myth number 1, I must know all the answers to all questions that I get asked to pass. If I can't answer even one question, I'm failing. And that is absolutely not true. In fact, I would say most of the time, pretty much 100% of the oral exams I've attended, there have been questions the students didn't know how to answer right off the top of their head, okay? The fact is you do not need to know how to answer all questions immediately when they're asked, But, and remember, the reason is because the goal of the exam are not just to taste your basic knowledge, but also to see how you think about complex problems and questions. And so if you haven't thought about a complex question up to that point, it's fine. What you want to do then is to, if you don't know the answer right away, think through the answer. And often we faculty, we understand you won't know everything, and we'll help you. We'll give you clues, we'll give you little hints. But what you want to do is take those clues and hints and really show us you can think through the problem to get to the answer, okay? We want to see that you have a potential as an independent scientist by thinking through answers. So probably if you don't remember anything else about this talk, I want you to remember this. Bring your brain to the exam, because we will ask you a question you don't know and you've never thought of. But what we want to see is that you can think through that question and come up with a reasonable answer. So bring your brain and please, please, please use it, okay? So bring your brain to the exam. If there's anything that you want to say to yourself right before the exam happens, say, I'm here, I have my beautiful brain, and it's going to perform for me today. Okay, the second myth, if I fail, I'll get kicked out of the program. That's not true. If you have a difficult exam, and it happens sometimes, remember you are allowed a second attempt at the exam, or of course, a wonderful option that is appropriate in some cases would be to take an MS degree. So please realize that your committee, and then there's actually kind of a third pseudo option, which means that you get a conditional pass. I'd say this doesn't happen very often, so don't count on it. But basically, if there's only one aspect that a student seemed weak at, there may be a remediation that will take care of that deficiency, which will allow the pass, but will allow the committee some assurance that that deficiency would be corrected. So this is really the case when there's maybe one serious deficiency, but there's a lot of positive that is in the exam. So I didn't want to end on a negative note, because you guys are all going to pass your candidacy exams. So what I wanted to do is just talk about what you're going to do after our class. So this is, you know, I really wanted to give you an idea of once this class is over, what are you going to do next? Because we won't be here meeting every other day. The first thing you're going to do is to continue it to improve your independent proposal. As I said, you should be rewriting it, submitting it to your lab mates or any other peers that you think could be helpful, and getting more and more feedback. Get that document into a state that you're really proud of. In addition, you're going to start the process of writing and rewriting your prospectus, in this case, with the help of your research advisor. So first of all, be sure you work hard in the lab, because the experiments that you do for this are going to go right in your prospectus. Just like you created a first draft of your independent proposal, you're going to draft a first version of your prospectus. And my advice here is just give yourself deadlines and make them to get it done. You'll rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. You'll get the advice of your lab mates and your advisors. Same kind of process. Finally, when you get to the point where you are creating your presentations, please give practice talks. If the first one goes beautifully, then maybe one will be enough. But if that doesn't go as well as you wanted, do two, do more. Please get feedback on each slide and ask the audience to really test your knowledge by asking hard questions. Because I'll tell you what, guys, it's better that you get the hard questions before the exam than during the exam, right? Okay. That's all I had to say. I know I've been talking for a long time, so I didn't see any questions or hands raised. I guess it's all clear. Anyway, of course, you're always welcome. Ed and I will be popping into the breakout sessions. And so we'll maybe interrupt to ask about any questions you have about these things.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to add with respect to the.
Oh, of course, Ed. Yes, of course.
Right. So with respect to the timeline that you kindly indicated, you know, the things that, I mean, with respect to these two major pieces of writing and two major presentations that you guys need to prepare, I mean, the amount of work is kind of significant. So one of the huge advantages that you have this year that I don't believe any other students of the previous generations ever had is we had this class much earlier. yes, we had to suffer through quite a bit of an acceleration in the class, a lot of tough writing on a tough deadlines, but here we are. And the thing is, you guys by now effectively have extra 5 months. You have doubled amount of time that students normally would not have. So please do take advantage of this available time too. My personal suggestion would be, because you are in complete control of your independent proposal, I would strongly suggest finishing it off this summer. You can polish your text, rewrite, as Mary Kay said, prepare your presentation. It's going to be time consuming to make a really nice presentation and practice it. So do take care of all of these aspects as soon as possible. This way you're done. Moreover, the experience that you're going to get out of this adventure with this independent writing is going to be very helpful for the other bit, where you will need your research experience in the lab. This way, you're going to be really set for success. One other thing that I would like to mention with respect to the timing of the events, one of the other unprecedented thing about your particular class is the size of your class. We have, what, 38, 39 students right now? Something like that. Right. Yeah. So scheduling the dates for your event may be tough with respect to have 3 faculties involved. Times 38 students can be quite a thing. So, you know, please do take advantage of the time that you have right now. If you can book things early, like for example, if you can book your event on the on January or February, please do. In case if you absolutely have to do it in April, well, you know, we'll make it work. But you know, be mindful to schedule the date ahead of time. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ed. And there is actually, we've gotten now 2 questions. The first question is, what would happen if your advisor does not want to help with their prospectus? Well, I mean, you are working with your advisor. So first of all, I would ask them to help you. But I would say if there's a challenge there, then please take advantage of your peers. They are allowed to and encouraged to help you, and you are welcome to have them talk to me if they don't agree with that. But that's the way this is supposed to work. So have them, you know, let them know that you are allowed and encouraged to talk with them. If they're busy, or, you know, I don't know why they would refuse, but if they do, then I would say go to senior members, either of your lab or a similar lab, and I bet they will do a really good job of helping you too.
And also with respect to the population of the students that we've seen in this class, many of you guys are coming in pairs from the same lab. So keep in mind that, you know, you're kind of in the same boat. So please do take turns, listen to each other's presentations, take rotations with respect to your documents that you're preparing to give the feedback to each other. It's going to be very, very helpful for you. Again, please do take advantage of the size of your class, because there are more of you.
The second question are the 2 presentations on the same day? Yes. So you will have 1 2-hour block that will be divided into 1 hour for the prospectus first, and then the second hour for the independent proposal. Yes, you will be done. It's a 2-hour, it's intense, folks. Get a good night's sleep and maybe do some exercises for the few weeks beforehand.
Oh yeah.
But the most important thing, folks, bring your brain. That's your best asset.